What's up, everybody? Rob here. So, the greatest RTS of all time is Age of Empires to Age of Kings and its subsequent expansion packs. It features several medieval factions, and these factions had their own unique unit, each one of them with its own special abilities specific to it. And I'm going to be analyzing these one at a time, and no better place to start with than the northwest of Europe. I'm going to be starting with the Celts and the Celtic Woad Raider. So, is it historically accurate? What inspired it? Let's find out. All right, here we go. So, the Celts are an ethnic and linguistic group and not a single unified empire or nation. It first started with the Hallstatt culture around 700 BC in what is now modern-day Austria, and the Celts then spread now across Europe, particularly in the northern parts of Europe away from the Mediterranean basin, and they went as far west as Spain and as far east as Turkey. Now, this was, again, not a unified empire or nation or anything like that. It was divided up into many different tribes and clans with their own belief systems and political systems. There were chieftains in charge. There were kings, oligarchs, even proto-versions of what we would consider today to be democracy. Now, their history is, of course, extremely biased. This is the ancient world before the Middle Ages. Their history is extremely biased, however, and it was written mostly by their Greek and Roman neighbors. And they could be very peaceful farmers and traders with the Romans and their Greek neighbors, but very often they could be very warlike and aggressive towards one another, and especially the Romans had a particular disdain for the Celts, mostly because the Celts actually sacked Rome early in Rome's history, and the Romans never really got over it. Yeah, who'd have thunk that, burning somebody's capital to the ground and stealing their stuff and, that would kind of make them, mad at you. Yeah, you live and learn. Any case, their main method of warfare seemed to be the frontal charge, something the Romans referred to as the Fura Celtica. It's basically like a proto-version of Viking Berserker gang. Basically what you do is you get a bunch of guys together, you get all pumped and, hyped for the battle, and then you rush in. And this seems to be a very commonplace thing throughout, well, at least that's what the Romans say that they did. And again, this is very biased, but it seems to be a common theme throughout Celtic history. Any case, sometimes they did use more formal formations like very phalanx, like shield walls and spear walls. And they also did use single combat by champions, or say a small group, like 3 or 4 guys on each side. They'd meet in the middle between the two armies and they'd fight it out. Their main weapons were spears, because, pretty much everybody's weapon were spears, as well as large oblong shields and short, straight swords. They fought almost exclusively as infantry, although nobles could be a form of cavalry, and they also made extensive use of chariots, something that had been abandoned in the rest of the world at this point. Julius Caesar, when he invades Britain, actually noted that there are chieftains on chariots moving up and down the coastline waiting to repel the Roman invasion. They also were very adept at the use of guerrilla warfare. They were very lightly armored, and basically only the chieftains had maybe a shirt of mail and an iron helmet. Everybody else either fought with very limited protection, and in some cases, they may actually have fought naked. There's at least some indication that they did that, although this is debatable by historians. Who can say? So what does this have to do with the Woad Raider? Well, first off, we have to determine what is woad. Well, woad is this plant here. It's known in Latin as Isatis tinctoria, which is a plant that was known from the British Isles and was used for the production of a deep blue dye that was used throughout the centuries. Celtic tribes in Britain used it as a body decoration, and this is actually where the Scottish tribe, known as the Picts, come from. The name Pict actually is not what they call themselves. It's what the Romans called them, and it means the painted ones. Now, it's very unclear if these were tattoos or if it was just body paint or maybe some combination of the two. But in any case, you basically had a bunch of these crazy guys painted blue running at you, shouting, waving spears and swords, and trying to murder you en masse. It's kind of a terrifying sight, if you can imagine. So what does any of this have to do with the unit in Age of Empires? Now, this obviously was inspired by Braveheart, which is totally inaccurate, but there is a kernel of truth there. Like I said, the Picts were very well known to paint themselves blue and use hit-and-run skirmishing tactics as well, which makes sense for the Woad Raider. The Woad Raider is a very fast-moving infantry unit. And they did operate during the Middle Ages. If you want to consider basically the Middle Ages, anything from the loss of Roman presence in a specific region, and that's the beginning of the Middle Ages. We call it nowadays the early Middle Ages. At the time, or in the game, and also popular history refers to it as the Dark Ages. In Britain, that was in 410 A.D., which was the time the Roman legions left Britain. And okay, so yeah, it does make sense there. So, I mean, we're kind of stretching it, though, because by the time the Middle Ages actually begin, the proper Middle Ages, outside of the Dark Ages, or as the game would consider it, the Feudal Age or possibly the Castle Age, the practice of painting yourself blue and charging off towards your enemy, that was long since abandoned. In Scotland, basically Scotland was plugged into the wider European world, and say, for example, during the time of the movie Braveheart, late 13th century, early 14th century, which is obviously what inspired the Woad Raider, a standard Scottish soldier would be pretty much indistinguishable from, say, an English one or a French one. They had probably better equipment in the more continental places. Like in Scotland, it was a relatively impoverished country, so they maybe wouldn't have had as high quality. But as far as, the actual style of equipment, it would have been virtually identical. However, not all hope is lost here. Actually, if you go across the Irish Sea to Ireland, there actually is something that could make a bit more sense here. Now, there was a class of individuals, a class of warriors, known as the Kerns. These were lightly armed and armored and would oftentimes use guerrilla and skirmishing tactics against their enemies. They made very extensive use of javelins, short bows, and other weapons to strike at an enemy, especially at a distance, and then withdraw before retaliation. And it fits the archetype that the Woad Raider in the game fits into, it being a fast, light infantryman, and they could be used for hit-and-run attacks and raid the enemy's commerce, raid the enemy's, in the game terms, they're peasants and all that stuff. And then if any resistance shows up, they can get it out of there real quick, unless you're fighting against cavalry, but, that's another story. So they fit the archetype pretty well, except they didn't actually use paint. Now, historically, these Kerns were raiders. That's what their main form of warfare was in Ireland. They very rarely fought pitched battles, and they would basically go to an enemy settlement. They would steal their cattle and other goods, particularly cattle. That was basically seen as the main form of wealth, and then they would withdraw. It was a very small scale of warfare, and it does fit the era. These were very common types of soldiers during the Middle Ages and even into the early modern era. Shakespeare actually mentions them in Macbeth, of all places. And they were used as raiders and skirmishers, and they did have a hard time dealing with the heavily armored knights and cavalry and infantry of the Anglo-Normans, basically the English when they came over. They actually had to rely on the Galloglass, which were Scottish mercenaries coming over as a heavy infantry component, so they can stand up to the heavily armored Englishmen who were trying to invade Ireland at the time. So, actually, really a good change for the game. This is just my suggestion here. Instead of using Woad Raiders, which kind of barely fits into the Middle Ages theme of the game, yeah, you can say, okay, in the Dark Ages there were some picks and they wore blue paint and all that stuff. But basically, if you want to have a fast-moving light infantryman that goes around, really quickly, lightning fast raids, and then can withdraw relatively quickly. Just change it to the Kerns. What you do is you get rid of the face paint. You give them a saffron, light yellow colored tunic, and change the name to a Kern, and you're pretty much in a good place. It's more or less the same thing. Maybe give them like a ranged weapon, like maybe something like a javelin or something. Like make them skirmishers, but with no minimum range. And maybe they can move really, really fast though. So fast-moving skirmishers with no minimum range, call them the Kerns, and that would be much more historically accurate. So, yeah, maybe. There's really not much more to say about this. The Woad Raiders being really just an amalgamation of Braveheart and more of an ancient form of warfare, and there's really not much more to say about that. So, yeah, change it to Kerns, and you might be onto something. In any case, that is it for this video. Please hit the like and subscribe button. More videos coming out whenever I get around to it. Have a good day. Or don't have a good day. Your adults have any kind of day you want. See you later.